Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our November 26th edition of our PBIS Leaders Network. We're glad you guys are with us today. We have a lot on the agenda. So without further ado, I think we're going to jump right in. We are recording again. And I think I know who Lord Farquaad is. They changed their name back. I'm glad. I was worried I was going to have to maybe remove somebody from the meeting. But good morning, everybody. We are going to go ahead and jump right in today. So thanks for joining us. We have a lot to talk about. So I know Stacy's been populating the chat with both our attendance and the bit.ly for the slides today. So please make sure that if you want the credit or the contact hour, or you're bundling with us to get the Ashland credit, you make sure you sign in for us so that we can give you your credit. And also if you want access to the slides, they are there as well. Make sure that you go ahead and jump on and do that. And we will just jump right in today then. I am going to throw it to my colleague Michelle because we have a couple of shout outs this morning before we get started into the content. So Michelle, take it away.
Thanks, Heidi. Good morning, everyone. So we want to send a huge congratulations to Erica Bauer, who I think I saw jump on this call, and Green Local Schools. They were recently recognized nationally for the work that they've done with their community partners, Starbucks, in Green, and were asked to record their work for PBIS app. Some of you may be familiar with their Mythbusters series, Teach by Design. Green Local was just featured in their newest podcast episode. So we really just want to congratulate them. If you have not heard about the work that Green has undertaken since 2017, we highly recommend you listen to this 40 minutes. It does a nice job of telling their story and highlighting all the amazing work that they've done over the last 8 years within the district. If you don't know about their work, Greenwood Early Learning Center agreed to be a early childhood PBIS demonstration site for the state of Ohio way back in 2017. And then their district caught wind of the great work that they were doing and wanted to implement that with consistency across the 5 buildings within their district. They will receive the District PBIS Award for the 2nd or 3rd year in a row, and have done amazing things collaborating with Starbucks and with their community in general. So if you have 40 minutes, if your car ride in is right around that amount of time, we highly, highly recommend listening to the podcast. And I think the link's there on the slide.
Yep, there's a direct link there that'll take you right to the PBIS apps page for their expert instruction podcast. There's all kinds of other great stuff on there too. Not that Green isn't doing fantastic stuff. They are. There's other good stuff on there as well. But if you have, like Michelle said, about 40 or 50 minutes, it's a great listen, and it really gives some good ideas as to how you can bring PBIS into your community and how to make those connections. It's really kind of awesome. So congratulations to Green. All right. And Erica is on our meeting this morning. So if anybody has questions at the end, we can open it up for questions for her as well. So I am starting with a selfish video to show you guys today. It comes from the first 5, which if you've been on our network meetings before, you know that I love the first 5 as a resource. I found it as I was looking for things to kind of share with you guys this morning. It's kind of a selfish watch, but I think it's worth it. It kind of touched my heart when I saw it. And I think starting our meeting this morning off thinking about, there's a lot of anger out there, and there's a lot of unpleasantness in the world. And I think this is just a great way to start our morning, to think about the power of human connection. And that's what we're trying to do with our PBIS framework. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play and close my mouth.
Don't call him just a neighbor. Paul Callahan is an honorary member of this family.
The kids run up to him, that's their grandfather.
You want to race? Let's race. Are you winning? That is a big cheating. I got a
It reminds me of when my wife and I first started.
Paul lives across the street from Shireen Caraballo. His wife died not too long ago. You could say Shireen's family has kind of adopted the 82-year-old.
He comes to every single cookout that we throw. Even if we're not having any family gatherings, he comes over.
When Shireen and her husband Wilson first moved into the area, they weren't sure what to expect.
Here's the neighbor.
You, Wilson? I have a couple of child car seats in the car.
Our biggest fear moving into a new neighborhood was, what if our neighbors don't like us? Unfortunately, we're the only Black family in our neighborhood, and we're the only minority. So it was like, what is this going to be like? But they're all very, very welcoming.
You get many chances to talk to people. If you don't take a chance, you may miss a friend that you would have had.
He's not even fazed by the crying, the bickering, the mommy, the Paul, take out your teeth kind of thing, because they bother him all the time to take out his teeth.
Ew.
Yeah. That's what happens when you don't brush your teeth, Paul said. Yeah.
I always try to leave people smiling, even if it was a joke about me.
I see.
C is a C, and then U is like that. I see you.
I see you.
Most of the kids around here blow bubbles and stuff like that.
Bubbles!
If I get a chance, I'll go to the store and pick them up, bring them back.
Even when her kids try to return the favor by doing something nice for him, like making sure he crosses the street to get back home safely, well, he returns the favor.
Paul, you walked him back across the street?
Hey, children are precious.
See you later. Not all people who are Black are bad, white are bad. You know what I'm saying? Just to see the love that we both share between Paul and our family. I love that my children are able to witness that from such a young age.
I never met a person I didn't like. It's easy to like, it's hard to hate.
So that was just a little selfish video from the first 5. Again, if you guys are not, if you guys are not utilizing the first 5, there's so many great resources in that email that comes in the morning, and it just reminded me children are precious, and let's spread kindness and not hate. So it just kind of touched my heart, and I wanted to share it with the network. So on that note, as children are precious, we are going to jump into our agenda. 3 things that we're going to talk about this morning. One, our whole kind of theme this year is revitalizing our practices. So we're going to talk about that. We have a great little presentation from Tina Saley. She's going to jump on in a second. We're going to talk about funding considerations and how you can leverage some of the title funds that you guys are getting for PBIS activities. Yeah, I'm crying too. And then finally, we're going to give you a strategy to go, which is going to be effective statements, and it's something that hopefully you can take with you. So that's kind of our agenda for this morning. So without further ado, we're going to jump into reminding you guys that Future Forward Ohio is the Ohio's plan from the Department of Education, and student wellness is on that plan. And of course, all the work that we're doing with PBIS is under the student wellness category. So I wanted to remind folks of that. So Tina's going to jump on. And if you were with us last month, we talked a little bit about how you could revamp your teaching practices, because we know things get stale and get old when we do PBIS the same way kind of over and over again. And so we talked about revitalizing our teaching practices and our matrix last time. And Tina's going to talk a little bit about what they're doing at Portage Lakes Career Center to revitalize their practices, as well as revitalizing some of their acknowledgments as well. So Tina, without further ado, I'm going to throw it to you.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, I had just mentioned to Heidi some of the layers. I like to think of PBIS as layers. If you just think about it as like that, tier 1 token economy type of a thing, and you get stuck there, then it never grows. But So at the high school level, I've always kind of struggled with the reteaching concept. So this year, if you want to go to the next slide, what we did to try to make it easy for high school teachers is to sort of just use what they're using, right? Like they're using the Google Suite, they're using Google Calendar all the time. So Google Calendar makes it super, super, super easy to quickly import events, right? Like we're all familiar probably with Google Calendar, but it also allows you to add details to it. And so we spent some time last year finding YouTube videos, just links to videos that were a good starting point for conversations to reteach working hard, being kind, and being responsible, which is our foundational behaviors for PBIS. So it just was so easy that now my teachers have subscribed to this Google Calendar that has, all of like the essential student activities that are going on in the building. And also every Monday has a link. All they have to do is click on the event. It has the link to the video that they can just click, pop it up, start the conversation for the week. For instance, this week is a Be Kind week. So we're focusing on Be Kind. So the link, would focus on that. I just thought it was like a game changer for me to discover that I could like embed that information into the events. And then the next slide, something else that we've kind of incorporated this year, like I just showed you my bracelet, it's Be Kind Week. So every Monday, the teachers find a bracelet in their mailbox. It's just one of these little silicone bracelets that, the students are working to earn each week. And high schoolers like them, which is pretty, sometimes it's hard to like find that niche of like, what are the things that high schoolers actually want to like work for. So the teachers, again, they have that video that highlights the behavior. That teachers wear these bracelets and look for the behavior throughout the week. Obviously, they're always looking for the behavior, but it becomes like just like that other layer, that next thing, that next reminder. And the students, are trying to earn it throughout the week. Some of the lab teachers, which I think is really cool, like our welding teacher, right? Like you would think that would be one of the, the hardest kid to reach, right? The welding student. And this teacher has adopted it so well, the whole program, honestly, that now he has like his students voting at the end of the week. Like, who do we think earned the Be Kind bracelet this week? I mean, to me, that is just like so far from where, I ever imagined it could be, honestly. And some of the teachers have reached out to me and said, hey, my students are like, hey, well, what if I see that behavior? Could I pass it on? And I'm like, yes. Now they're looking for the behavior to pass on the bracelet to somebody else. So it's kind of just another layer that we've added this week or this year. We also, I just want to put another plug in for the first 5. I love it. It is another layer, and it is I would say hit or miss in its adoption with teachers, but the teachers that use it are like, oh my gosh, this is so great. It's so easy. It comes to my inbox every day. I can pick what I want. And it's like, they didn't have to plan it. They didn't have to think it. And it's good. It's quality stuff, and it's really good conversation starters. So another layer that we've added this year, just trying to reinforce attendance. Attendance is just so tricky for everybody. But again, to like, how are we, getting kids to want to come to school? How are we improving that school culture? How are we keeping it a constant part of what we do in our conversation? So I've been working with our design, communication, and marketing kiddos to create an attendance reinforcement. If you use Progress Book and, Dazzle, it's super, super easy to run yourself a district-wide membership report for the previous week is what we do. Here comes the information. This is the attendance. Copy, if you don't have somebody who's really good at Google Sheets, find you somebody who's really good at Google Sheets because a shout out to Mr. Cusaro, our school counselor. He's amazing. You can go to the next slide. So basically every week, one of our administrative assistants runs that report. they copy and paste it into this weekly attendance spreadsheet that we have. He has automatically, I have no idea how, made it so that my kiddos that are seeing this information are only seeing what you guys see here. They're not seeing student names or anything like that. They just have access to one specific tab. And it, creates this like weekly competition with homeschools and grades, gender, and programs. And so if you go to the next slide, the prize, again, trying to come up with something that high schoolers are interested in and get excited about, and they are actually really excited about this. We have a coffee cart. And it's so satisfying when you pull out that top drawer. It's like just full of K-cups and it's hot cocoa and it's the lattes and all the things that the teenagers like. So every week, one of my DCM students who's really good with Canva and, Photoshop and all those kinds of cool things, they create just a really simple little video highlighting for all the students who has won in terms of gender, grade, homeschool, and then the winners of the coffee cart. And, we started to get, it's like, you can't just like lay it out. These are the rules and this is what it's going to be forever. Like you got to adapt, we have cosmetology students who never miss school. And we have fire academy students who literally cannot miss school because they're going to Stark State and it's a whole thing if they do. So, it was like, okay, well, they're always going to be the winners. How can I spread the love a little bit more? So let's pick maybe the top 4, so the teacher scheduled a coffee cart and the kids seem to love it. And, just yesterday, there was a mistake. The administrative assistant who does the spreadsheet work for me was out. So my video was created based on the previous week's data. And I had a teacher saying, no, I don't think that's right. I think my kids had 100% attendance because they were really working for it. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're paying attention. They really want this thing. So if you want to just go ahead and click the video, you can just see it's really simple little. Who shows up? Always the women. And again, all this information just comes from that really simple little report. Manchester always has great attendance. That's it. So anyways, it's become, like a friendly little competition. I love like the concept of competition with PBIS, how can we, with teachers, and with the students. So there's just a couple new layers that we're doing here at PBI or at PLCC.
I love the graphic design. I think that's awesome with the video. And it's great to get the kids involved in creating that stuff. I think that's so awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. And the kiddo that does the videos for me every week, she's such a sweetheart. It's really like given her like a leadership position actually, where she probably would not have been the type of kiddo to be in that kind of position. And you could see that it like gives her a little bit of confidence, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Any questions? I'll throw it out for Tina before we move on, and we'll probably have time at the end, but does anybody have any questions for Tina and her Google Calendar invites that has, oh my gosh, it's so great to just keep people on track. It's really, really awesome, but I'll throw it out for questions if anybody has, and if not, we'll move on. And you see some love in the chat, Tina. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing. I think it's a great idea how you're leveraging your students to do that work too. That's awesome. It's awesome. Okay, well, if there's no questions right now, we'll probably have time at the end. Oh, go ahead, Stacy.
There was a quick question about where do you order the bracelets?
Oh,
I get them from General Commercial. I originally got them on Amazon, but I found them way, way cheaper. I didn't see who asked that, but I'm going to put my email address in here, and whoever that was, they can email me and I'll send them the quote so they have an idea of what it cost.
Thank you, Stacy. Yes, I did not see that question. Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? There's Tina just put her information regarding the bracelets in the chat. Awesome. Okay, so in our theme and in the spirit of revitalizing or refreshing our practices, we wanted to just bring up a couple of prompts for you guys with your teams to think about. And that, besides teaching, and Tina talked a little bit about how they've revamped their teaching and their reinforcement, especially with the attendance, which I love, because attendance is really such an issue right now since the pandemic. I think all of your buildings are struggling with that. We wanted to have you think a little bit about your flow chart and your behavioral definitions. Thinking about when was the last time that you revisited those. I think it's really good that we think about our matrix and making sure that the matrix is not a static document, but it is a fluid document that we can change as our data changes or as our clientele change. But we should be thinking about that as far as the behavior definitions and flowchart as well. I'm working with a district that in January, they are going to change their entire code of conduct, their definitions for behavior. They're rearranging everything. That is going to impact every building's flow chart because it's not going to be what they had in the past. So they're going to have to not only look at their definitions, but they're also going to have to look at their flow chart. The other thing is a lot of your buildings are going to more of a restorative approach. And if your flow charts were built on more of a punitive or reactionary approach, you're definitely going to have to relook at that. So we would really invite you to think about, how have you should really be revisiting these at least yearly anyways to share with staff to make sure they're using these procedures. But when was the last time you really looked at that and thought about, have things changed? Has our need changed to have things on there, and have our definitions changed so that we need to go in and change those because it's not really aligning anymore with what we're doing. So we wanted you to kind of think about that. There is a direct link here on the left of that chart. I kind of stole that. Please don't tell anybody. I stole that from the new modules that are coming out from Ocali that are not out yet, but I stole this resource from there. If you click on there, it'll take you to that flow chart. But I just wanted to point out that there are really nice proactive and restorative approaches that are on this flow chart. And it would be something for your teams to think about, especially if you are, again, going in that direction. So why would you even want to revisit these practices? Well, we know that climate really depends on the consistency of those procedures, a positive climate, and people are frustrated when procedures are not followed consistently. And it also allows the school to hold those students accountable for the expectations, which is really important. So a couple of questions that your teams can think about are, number one, are we practicing these procedures across all staff? Are they predictable across all staff? And are they equitable across all staff? And if you can't answer yes to those questions, I would say it would be a time for your district PBIS team and or your building PBIS team to go back and look at those things, because we want to make sure that these are being used. And quite frankly, in a lot of buildings that I've worked with, and I know some of my colleagues on this call as well, is they've constructed this flow chart or their T chart, or they've constructed their major minors, but they're not really using them consistently. So it's really important that we look back to make sure, number one, this is serving our purpose. And number two, are we training and sharing that across our staff? So it's really, really important because those procedures need to be in place. So here are just a couple of considerations that I found from this KOI education company, which I thought were really good. So I want to give them credit for it. But I think it's really good thoughts to think about looking at your flow chart and your definitions. And first of all, the first question is, does it align with your school-wide expectations? I think a lot of times when teams put these procedures in place, they don't totally align with their school-wide expectations. So that's the first thing that you'd want to check. And then the other thing with that is being really intentional about your language. In other words, and I'm guilty of saying this, 3 minors equal a major. Instead of saying something like that, could we say something like repeated minor behaviors result in an office discipline referral? And being really, really very targeted with your language that way. We want to be very, very precise with our language. The other thing is, I know for teams it's difficult, but are you tracking your documented repeated minor interventions that you're using? I know that's really hard for teams because it's extra documentation, but making sure that not only are you documenting those things, but teachers are using those interventions from the flowchart, like proximity, reteaching, relocating a student if necessary. Is there a reflection activity you're having students do? Reteaching an academic skill that maybe a student is struggling with, and making sure that every teacher in the building knows what those procedures are and are doing them. And then lastly, those office managed procedures. Of course, we want to make sure that any consequence is aligned with your district policy or school policy, but always making sure that if a documentation is completed and turned into the office, that there is feedback on that documentation. I am working with a building right now that is struggling to get teachers to turn in referrals, because the main reason is because there's been no feedback given after the referral is turned in. So we want to make sure our administrators are following up on those referrals, even if it's not a punitive consequence that's being given. What is the response, and making sure that that's communicated to the teacher. Because if teachers feel like they're doing that and nothing's being done with that, obviously they're not going to fill the reports out, or they're not going to fill out the ODR. So that's really, really important. A couple of resources that I found I thought were really, really very helpful are on this slide, and that is really for your plan to teach staff and students your behavior flowchart. Do your PBIS teams have a plan to teach the flowchart to both students and teachers? You can't ever assume that the flowchart is self-explanatory. And I always say you start every year, or anytime your data says that you need a refresh on this, but at least yearly you should be looking at this stuff. So in the middle there, that lesson plan, there's a direct link there for a lesson plan to actually teach students what is on the flowchart. And then there's also on the right a case study slide deck for staff. So it actually takes you through scenarios of what would you do if you came up against this scenario. How would you use your flow chart, or where does that fit into our behavioral definitions for that? So both of these come from this KOI education. They're free resources that I found online. And I think they were both excellent examples of how you can teach both students and staff what's on your flow chart and what's expected when these behaviors do occur. So I think those are great considerations. So just a question for you guys on the call. Has anybody recently or since the institution of your definitions or flow chart, have you revisited those or changed those? Or do you have a plan to do so?
Are we supposed to talk or chat?
Yeah, you can go. No, you can use, I'm sorry, you can use the chat, or absolutely unmute and talk. I'd rather you do that anyway.
Okay. So we in Barberton, we just merged buildings 3 years ago. So we were East and West, and now we are primary intermediate. So that kind of brought like a natural way for us to revisit a lot of things, because we were using the same matrix in both East and West buildings, but now we had to make it more specific to K2 instead of a whole elementary building. So just a few years ago, we kind of revamped, and it wasn't huge changes. It was just a couple things like using more visuals for the younger kids, some more, I don't want to say simple, because we still try and use the same language, but just kind of making it more developmentally appropriate for the littles.
I think that's a great consideration. When you're making a move like that, it's absolutely the time to revisit that. I know some buildings actually, in preparation for when they're having building changes, they're kind of doing that before the change occurs. So that's a great opportunity to do that. The district I'm working with, that they're changing in January their whole kind of code of conduct. I said, this is a great opportunity then to revisit your flow chart and to get people back into that work. It's a great time when you're having changes like that. I think that's great. Mm-hmm. Kelly said we updated ours after all of the behavior changes we were seeing after COVID. So last year's building is reviewed and updated. So there was a change, obviously, since COVID. We're seeing different things happen. So I think that's another a great consideration.
Heidi, I was just going to share too. I was at a
Go ahead, Stace.
Yeah, I was at a PBIS meeting last night with the team, and they did this. They went through, and it was interesting because when they adopted it, it was a district-wide adoption, and now they're looking back at some of the behaviors and realized those aren't behaviors they actually see in their building, and so they had to tweak those. But it was really a great conversation about what do we actually see in our building, and how do we define that.
Yep, I think that's a great consideration. And I think that just goes to show that the framework, you want to be paying attention to it and attending to these things because things change. And that's why things need to be flexible and fluid. We don't want to maybe necessarily laminate our matrix or put into, final copies of things because things do change. And so we need to have the flexibility in which to respond to our data. So thank you. Thanks, Kelly, for sharing that. Any other thoughts about coming back to those practices? That's going to influence your teaching of expectation. It may impact how you're responding or reinforcing behaviors. And of course, it will impact your definitions of behavior and how you're responding to those negative behaviors too. You'll want to look at that, especially if your data is changing. So I think those are great. Thank you guys for jumping in. Those are great considerations. So we're going to go ahead and switch gears now and jump into some just state updates. And so I will tell you what I'm about to share with you. I am not totally, I'm not totally knowledgeable about, but I was at a meeting about a month ago for the data leads in the state, and they talked about this federal formula grants for PBI and PBIS. And I thought it was really good information because me as a PBIS trainer, I was unaware of a lot of the leveraging that you could do with the title funds. So I'm going to kind of go through what some of those things are. If you have a question specifically, I may not be able to answer it, but there are, we can reach out to the department for that. But I thought it was really quite interesting what the Department of Education and Workforce is sharing with folks about how you can leverage some of these federal funds. So there's a direct link on the right side there in the text to this document that is posted there. You can get this document directly if you have a question. And so everything I'm going to share with you on the next set of slides comes directly from this document from the department. So starting with Title 1A, which is funding that's intended for students who are from low-income families, ways to leverage some of this funding would include, if you do receive Title 1A funds, would be funds for counseling, for behavioral interventions, and also for school-based mental health services. So if there are supplemental activities that you're doing in these areas, if you do receive Title 1A funds, you can leverage some of these funds for that. Now, I'm sure everybody on this call may not get those because those are funds for low-income families to help ensure children are meeting those state standards. But if you do receive those funds, that is one pool of money you can actually look at for PBIS funding. The next one they talked about was Title 2A. And the purpose for that funding is really to strengthen teacher effectiveness, principal and school leader effectiveness. And what I thought was really interesting about this one is there are multiple ways you can leverage this funding. So I do have a little cheat sheet here I'm going to use, but you can use these funds to go above and beyond the basic professional development requirements for PBIS, for things like book studies, teacher workshops, and speakers even that you could use this for. In addition, you can use this for training that will link children to treatment intervention services, also school-based mental health programs, and partnerships for funding training for how we make partnerships between our schools and these mental health programs. Also, with this funding, you can use it for training for safety, peer interaction, drug and alcohol abuse. And the other thing that I was really found interesting is you can use this funding for training for chronic absenteeism. I had no idea that was even out there. So I thought that was really interesting. In addition, you can use some of this funding for in-service training to show teachers and personnel how to refer students who have trauma or who are at risk of mental illness. Also, you can provide professional development to improve conditions for equity and cultural responsiveness. That was also a new information for me as well. And those groups could include underrepresented minority groups, groups from diverse national origins, English language learners, as well as varying genders and sexual orientations. And again, that would be for training for those things. Also, professional development for trauma-informed practices, SEL, restorative practices, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, and other areas of support that you could integrate into the PBIS framework. Again, I was not aware of that. Also, you could, with this funding, you could also fund a PLC on various topics of PBIS. One that they suggest are the classroom practices, the effective classroom practices. And this last one I found to be totally interesting is that you could use this funding to fund a teacher peer support group to promote teacher mental wellness. Again, was totally blown away by this session I went to. I thought it was really quite illuminating. In addition we are looking at also 4A. With 4A, that's really the thing that you can look at for 4A is that second bullet there, and that is to improve school conditions for student learning. And so I think using 4A to do that, there are some suggested things that they had talked about. You could develop videos with this. You could purchase curricula with this 4A. You could there's other couple things that you can do. I got a little mixed up with my notes here. Stipends for leadership teams with this funding. Again, I was totally unaware of that. You could also fund family liaisons. You can fund things like family engagement activities, community partnerships, services, coordinating services, speakers for students and parents. And then the other things that you can look at as far as 4A is concerned is evidence-based curricula for tiers 2 and 3, and costs for building level data collection, as well as looking at data systems that go beyond referrals and detentions. I thought, again, that was very interesting. That was new information to me. If you are a building that is doing FBA, functional behavior assessment to behavior intervention plan, within this category, you can also use this funding to buy things to support your functional behavior assessment and your behavior plans. And even things as far as mental health experts and mentors come underneath this category, as well as materials for tier 3 interventions. So again, this was information that I was totally unaware of as far as using your title service or your title funding to support these services. In addition, you can use your funding for supplemental activities. Also to things such as posters, videos, you can use for those kinds of activities. And we talked about the data tracking and designing and implementing a tailored plan to reduce exclusionary discipline practices. So if you have a plan that really does talk about reducing the exclusionary discipline of students, it can be used here as well. In addition to that, you can use it even for nominal kinds of things like pens, bookmarks, and erasers, as far as things that you're using for tier 1 reinforcements, but it has to be something small. But you can still use 4A for some of these things. And then they also included on this slide is some things like early dismissal to go to lunch or lunch with a staff member. I'm not exactly sure how you would fund that, but I would say that that is something that you could also look at as far as leveraging that 4A. And then if you do, I don't know how many folks on this call do receive the Stronger Connections grant, but within the Stronger Connections grant, what you could also leverage those funds to support your PBIS work. I think those funds are coming to an end at this point. But I'm not sure if they're going to re-up that, but if you are receiving the Stronger Connections grant, those monies can also be used to support PBIS initiatives in your schools. So looking at all of that, when I had gone to this session, I was totally unaware that how the funding worked and how you could leverage some of these things. And we just wanted to kind of throw out to you guys, is there a way that you're leveraging funding right now with your buildings or districts to use any of these title funds? Because again, me not being in the districts or being in a building, I was unaware that you actually could even use some of these title funds to leverage any of these kinds of activities. Is anybody utilizing any of this for what they're leveraging any of these funds for to support PBIS activities?
Heidi,
Yes.
Crestwood's using Title 4A for PBIS rewards purchase.
Okay, so that would be like a data system.
Correct.
Okay, awesome.
And then we're also using some of our title grants to pay. We have a PBIS liaison in each of our buildings.
Okay.
And so we're using that to pay that cost.
Great. And again, for me, it was totally something new, so I was unaware of that. So great. So data systems, Sherry's saying in Crestwood, they're leveraging some of that money for some data systems. They're leveraging that money for to pay a liaison as well, which I was unaware. One of the other things that it talked about was that you could use, and I don't know if I mentioned it with the 4A, stipends or supplemental contracts for leadership teams. I was unaware that you could pay stipends using some of those funds. So that was also something that was suggested in this meeting I went to, that you could actually pay, because I know a lot of our teams are meeting after school beyond the contract day, and some of that 4A, it was 4A, right? The 4A could be used for providing stipends for those leadership teams. So I thought that was really interesting as well. Anybody else leveraging any of those funds for PBIS work that they're doing?
You're welcome. So we have a PBIS tutor in our building that was a title tutor. I hesitate to bring that up because a lot of teachers are kind of unhappy with that shift and would rather her be back as a more reading support. So while it's nice to have the behavior support, teachers are not real pleased with it.
Okay, that's an interesting
observation.
So I guess it would have to be fit within the need of the building and what the building, really needs. Yeah. Okay, so again, like I said, when I attended this data meeting, I was unaware that you could even leverage funds that way to support PBIS activities. But it's interesting to know that I know a lot of times people do ask us at the state support team what grants are out there or what funding sources are out there, and there are within what you're already receiving, there is some. I know that money is probably tied to so many things, and it's probably very tight to try to manipulate that. But a lot of people do ask, what grants are out there, or what can we use to leverage funding? And within the title funds, there is some flexibility there, and it was good to know that. Again, totally new information to me. Stacy did put in the chat a direct link to that document that really talks about how you can leverage some of those funds. And I would just keep, every so often we will hear about things like the Stronger Connections grant or school climate transformation grants that come out. And so I always try to, on our networks, if I hear about things like that, I do try to send that in case people want to take advantage of those, but those are usually kind of few and far between, and they only come around every so often. So it might be good information to know that there are, if you do get existing funding, that there may be ways to manipulate some of that, because those other grants are not a sure thing, unfortunately. So thank you guys for sharing that, and I apologize for the dog barking outside my window. But thank you for sharing that, because it does seem like we do have some districts that are are utilizing and leveraging some of that money. So as we kind of round third and head home here this morning, we do want to leave you with a strategy to go. It's kind of something that we're going to do every time. And thank you, Frank Gant, for that suggestion, because we are, he had said, maybe not like a make and take, but maybe we could leave people with one thing that they could at least use as they leave our network meetings. And so that strategy this morning is going to be effective statements. So if you paid attention to the flow chart that I had shared earlier in the presentation, it really talked about using some of the restorative continuum as a response to behavior. And if you look at the restorative practices continuum, you will see that informal restorative practices would be things like effective statements or effective questions. And you go all the way to that formal side, which is the formal conference or circles. So one of the things that we suggest is if you're starting to think about more restorative practices within your buildings, a great way to start, and we've talked about effective or restorative questions before. We haven't really talked about effective statements, though, in our network. And so effective statements really are a really simple way to start that whole process for restorative practices. And really very simple. It's saying, I feel something when you something because something. So an example would be, I feel validated when all of you guys attend our PBIS Leaders Network, because it makes us feel like we're providing a service to you. So that's a positive effective statement. I think sometimes people think effective statements are only used when a conflict or a problem happens, but in reality, you want people using these practices before a problem happens. You want to set that culture first. So one of the things that you can do is with your PBIS teams, is to talk to your staffs about, can we start using effective statements? I feel hurt when you call me a name because it makes me feel like less of a person, or whatever those things are. You would really want to start with the positive, though, because you want to get people comfortable using them. It's kind of a wonky, uncomfortable practice until you start doing it all the time. So you really got to get people to practice it. But again, I feel excited when I know that Thanksgiving is coming, because we have some days off and I'm going to get a little bit of sleep. So that is a positive, effective statement. And so here are some resources that you can utilize. The first one is a video that really shows you how you can use effective statements. The second one is a Fisher and Fry resource from Corwin. What I like about that second one is it gives you sentence starters, but it also gives you scenarios in which you can use effective statements. So I really like that one. And then the last one is the Virtues Project. I kind of like that handout because it gives you the overview of really what restorative practices are and where effective statements fit. And it also gives you some sentence starters there too. So that 2 and 3 both give you some sentence starters if you're not comfortable doing this practice, because again, it's kind of wonky and awkward when you start. But once you jump in and start to use that language, then when issues occur or conflicts occur, it's a little bit easier to get people to use those. So those are all directly linked on that slide if you want to start thinking about effective statements. And when you really think about the continuum, that's really the most informal of the restorative practices that we have. So if you can get folks to kind of start thinking about using that language when problems occur, it's a little bit easier to use those statements when people are used to using them. So that's really the content that we do have for you this morning. I do have a poll I'm gonna start in a second, because I had a request from a high school regarding some networking opportunities. Last year, you guys may remember that we did a couple, I don't know if anybody on the call attended, but we did a couple of regional high school, middle school PBIS networking sessions. We did not schedule any this year because there wasn't a huge, I don't know, a lot of people, it wasn't like hugely attended, I guess I would say. And we still do have the APBS high school think tank, which is still going on. And that is a national kind of thing that people can jump on if they want high school support. So we did not intentionally plan anything, but I did have a request from a local high school that would like to meet with more regional folks at the high school level. So the question that we're going to ask, and I'm going to throw up a poll here for us in a second, is would there be any interest from your high schools or middle, and it could be middle school too, to network after our next PBIS Leaders Network, which would be on January 14th. What we're thinking is we would go 9 to 10 with the network, and then maybe afterwards stay for as long as people would like. So I'm going to throw up I am going to throw up the poll. And then if you guys could just answer the questions just to see if we have any interest in that, we'll plan for that at our next meeting. Since we're already going to be meeting anyway, I think it would probably be easier. So I got a couple of people joining in. If you guys could go ahead and answer that question, we'll see if it's worth it to do that. It would be starting at 10 o'clock on January 14th. I'll give it about 15 more seconds. Take about another 10 seconds. If anybody would be interested in high school, middle school opportunities after our next Leaders Network. I'm going to give you about 5 more seconds and I'm going to close the poll. All right. So it looks like there is some interest, and maybe we will plan for that for our next meeting. If there are, for those of you that are interested, if there are specifics like topics that you want to talk about, or if there's particular barriers that you want to think about, shoot me an email so we can make sure that we have that on the agenda. So I think next time we may be talking a little bit about, we're thinking of some MTSS connections, and then we could do the high school networking after that. I'm not exactly sure if that's going to happen for sure, but that's kind of what we're thinking. But we could talk about those the PBIS high school considerations after that. So it looks like there's enough interest that I will throw it out. We can throw it out there. And so thank you for answering that poll, because we weren't quite sure. We had a couple sessions last year. They were attended, but not greatly so. So we weren't quite sure if that was still a need for folks, but we'll plan on staying after at our next network and talk specifically about the secondary issues, if that's helpful for you guys. All right. So as we kind of head home here, we wanted to show you what our upcoming PD events and activities are coming up. We do have, and I don't know if Frank is still on the call, but if he is, we do have a session coming up for combating chronic absenteeism, since we know that's an issue on January 7th. And if Frank, if you're on and want to unmute and talk about that, I'm not sure.
I'm going to chirp in for Frank because
okay,
Frank's
thanks, Mike.
Sitting out, but yes, the next combating chronic absenteeism. It's an ongoing series, but you can pop in at any time. We will be also looking at some family engagement strategies and working through that. So we invite anyone to attend. We talk about, how to go about combating chronic absenteeism. It's right in the name, but different ways of approaching it. Once again, the focus at our January 7th session will be family engagement. So join us. We're glad to have you.
And those are direct links to the registration, guys. So if you have the slide show, and I know Sherry's asking to repost that. I know Stacy will do that in the chat. You can click directly on those links to get to whatever sessions are listed there. Our next PBIS network, as already mentioned, is on the 14th of January, and we're thinking that MTSS connections are going to be the topic, possibly, and then we'll definitely plan for the high school networking afterwards, since we seem to have gotten a pretty good response there. We'll plan on that for the 14th. And then 2 kind of newer offerings that we're going to have in the winter spring this year is going to be a repeat of our Classroom Harmony session, which is going to be on February 11th. That session really talks about what should be happening in a PBS classroom with trauma-informed considerations and restorative practice considerations, but thinking about what should be happening in these classrooms to make sure that we have our classroom harmony and that that we have these practices in place. That's a one-day PD, and the link is there. And then brand new this year, that we're going to be doing on April Fools, and that is not an April Fool's joke, but it is really going to happen on April Fool's Day, is our Tools for Transformation, and it's going to be 1 day of restorative practices training, and we're going to be talking about at that one really the culture building and why of restorative practices, and then we're going to talk a lot about the practices that you saw in that continuum today, starting with effective statements and questionings, going all the way to like circles. So that's going to happen on the 1st of April. No April Fool's joke. So again.